Hi, my name's Stephanie, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar today, Organizing and Managing Services in the ServiceNow Service Portal. A few quick notes. Your phone lines are muted today, so if you have any questions, please use the chat panel. And please send your chat message to all presenters. That way I can roll through those questions and get them assigned. Also, we are recording today, so you will receive an email from the ReadyTalk platform no later than tomorrow afternoon with a link to both the slides and the recording to this event. And lastly, later in the presentation when Jeff's giving his demo, you may find it helpful to go to full screen mode. This will give you a much better view of the portal. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen Systems. Don?
Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen, and with me is Jeff Benedict, as always, my co-partner in crime who heads up our ITSM practice and leads our innovation efforts. And I'm one slide ahead. There we go. Okay. So if you're new to our series, welcome. If you're a past attendee, thanks for joining us again. Our goal, as always, is to share valuable information and insights you can use today in your planning and activities. The topic we will explore is organizing and managing services in the new ServiceNow Service Portal. So here's our agenda. After a very little bit about Evergreen, we'll dive into the topic. After that, we'll briefly demonstrate our always evolving view of a very advanced self-service portal and catalog which is built on ServiceNow Service Portal. Then we'll answer questions if you have any. So Evergreen is a U.S.-based consulting firm. We work with hundreds of mid-market, Fortune 1000 companies, and public sector organizations to help improve their IT service management execution. Hard to believe, over the past 18 years, we've delivered more than 4,000 IT service management projects. We are a full lifecycle firm. We have both process and technology consulting in the same company. It allows our customers to not have to be the systems integrator. We are one of only 2 top-tier U.S. ServiceNow partners now that Fruition is CSC Global and Cloud Serpros is Accenture. We have well over a decade of domain expertise in virtually every area of the ServiceNow portfolio, but we view all of this from a perspective we call customer-centric IT service management. At Evergreen, we think traditional ITSM thinking is wrong because it puts the customer last. It's hard to believe, but it's true. It's kind of like that game, Where's Waldo? 3 years ago, I had a Newtonian moment when an apple hit me falling off the tree, and we really took notice of the beautiful self-service experiences we were having as consumers with it. Amazon, Apple, Zappos, Airbnb, you can name them, Uber, and wondered, why don't our ITSM customers have the same thing? Or why can't they? And the answer was, they could. So we started challenging our thinking on ITSM, and as a result, we began looking at everything we did first from the customer in rather than IT out. And that's the essence of what we call customer-centric ITSM. If we start with the customer, we actually do things very differently. We focus on preventing incidents rather than just handling them. We use self-service and automation across ITSM to make customers happier and reduce or eliminate IT's work. We see services as end-to-end team value chains rather than disconnected silos. In knowledge, it can become a powerful, self-service, beautiful enablement experience we use to change the value of technology for all of our customers. IT is at a crossroads today. We have to decide, will we remain a provider of technologies or evolve into a strategic services partner? Innovative IT organizations are beginning to see that their value is in delivering what the customer needs and wants in a high-quality experience that meets the customer's expectations. They're also realizing they don't actually have to provide every technology solution because the customer doesn't care about that. They only care about the functionality. Software as a service and front-ending AWS cloud for on-demand compute are 2 very clear and very pervasive examples of this. This, in turn, is leading IT to focus on true services rather than just technical outcomes, which is fueling the emergence of the role of the service owner. In our way of thinking in IT, the way we think That's a new thing, okay? Someone who owns the outcome the customer really wants, end to end. Okay, so we'll dive into our topic now. Anyone can organize and manage 10 services they create and provide. But what about 50, 100, or 500? And what if a dozen different parts of IT each want to create and publish their own services? Now let's add HR, facilities, legal, and contracts to this conversation. And what if each names their services whatever they want and wants their service portal to have the look and feel they know that their customers want, or in parentheses, that they want? Because that's exactly what's happening. Now be the customer. You use Amazon and Airbnb. What if buying shoes was a great experience, but buying a stereo was terrible? What if on Airbnb, the experience for renting a beach house in North Carolina was entirely different than renting a mountain house in South Carolina? Would you say for those, Amazon and Airbnb, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad? No. You would say it's lousy. And you would never use it again. This is the same for your customers. When people have large numbers of things to organize and manage, they generally use some sort of a taxonomy. ITIL doesn't provide us any guidance on this, so at Evergreen we had to look outside of IT to determine what we ought to do. So if we start kind of definitionally, taxonomy is the practice and science of the classification of things. A numbered list is a type of taxonomy, but it isn't very good for understanding hundreds of things. We need what we call a service taxonomy, or a logical, repeatable way to classify the services we offer as well as the ones we might want to offer. The taxonomy of the animal kingdom here is a pretty good type of taxonomy model for IT services because the classification goes from very broad to specific, from millions to few. The 140-year-old Dewey Decimal System is another good taxonomy example, still in use at over 200,000 libraries today. Could you imagine trying to find a book or run a library without it? Most taxonomies organize things into logical categories, groups, or even subgroups as the classification gets more specific. So what's the best type of taxonomy for you? It's the one that is most useful in creating and managing the services you want to offer. So here are some of the benefits of a service taxonomy. Since we will have a number of constituents, customers and providers with varying interest in building and maintaining our taxonomy, having a commonly understood way to group and classify items helps in the consistent definition and categorization of services. This consistency also brings clarity amongst the constituents as a strong general group understanding of the use of the taxonomy framework develops. Being able to see and handle the framework easily from high to low helps to shine a light on redundant or unnecessary services, thereby simplifying the service catalog, as well as ensuring individual services are built in the most simple and reusable way. A well-understood classification system makes it much easier to align services in logical groups and hierarchies of groups, eliminating, or actually helping to eliminate, the cultural or organizational biases that come around that mentality of trying to own those services. A clear, consistently understood framework with its attendant services makes it easier to identify services or sub-services that can be combined much more easily and quickly to create new services, driving up beneficial reuse. The highest level, the framework should capture the broadest view of what you see as potentially within the scope of your effort. Of course, the taxonomy can grow or shrunk later. It's not locked down. But it's easier to start with a broad view. There is no downside to it. You don't have to use it all right away, and you will minimize reclassification efforts later on that could come from changing the taxonomy. Important point. The parts of a taxonomy are meant to be parts of a whole, one taxonomy. Here's a simple example of a broad framework covering line of business services, shared services, and two types of IT service categories. Unless we have really good enterprise-wide role definitions to work from, and most organizations don't really have those, we usually break IT services into two groups: customer-facing services and internal IT services, because most organizations can tell who's in IT and who isn't. You don't have to follow this convention, but we find these are often mixed together, which can confuse everyone. Here you also see one of our service taxonomy principles, and that is the labels are for the customer and the framework is for the providers. A service can be presented to a customer many different ways. It may be in a what's new kind of flashing icon, or in a list of people who like this, also like this kind of services. It isn't just bound by drilling down a taxonomy. But any section of the taxonomy is targeted at a particular customer set. And since we want to think like the customer, then the labels in that section should be in the customer's language, not the provider's. If you look at the two categories above for IT, you can see the difference in the labels for the two groups. What do we mean when we say the framework is for the providers? It's the way the providers can understand the breadth and depth of services and the combinations of services offered. If you have 300 services, could you understand a numbered alphabetical list of them? No, it would be too hard. So the framework is for the providers to help understand the services and combinations offered logically, to avoid creating redundant services, to better combine existing ones, and to ensure that services are aligned with the right customer. Another principle we have at Evergreen is that we all have services and we all have customers. So here's a view of that conversation from a visual service taxonomy perspective. At the top, IT is providing an infrastructure or internal IT service from the category business continuity in support of an application, SAP. The customer for the service, the first service, is the IT employee who owns the app, SAP. That IT employee provides the service we are calling SAP application to his customer, the finance department, in this case at a college. The college finance department provides the service, collect amounts owed, or pay your tuition online here, to their reluctant customer, the college student. Chain of customers, chain of services. Excuse me. So, the taxonomy is only a framework for organizing and ends where services begin. Requests are transactions that are placed against the service. Here we're showing how all three relate, as this is the end-to-end experience of the customer. To help better see the distinctions, we've color-coded them. The taxonomy is purple, the services are orange, and the requests are green. The taxonomy can have as many levels as makes sense in any given section of it. One area may only have 2 levels of classification, while another may require 5. The guiding principle is a customer-centric one. What is the way the customer would expect to see it? As a general rule of thumb, if any area exceeds 7 or 8 items, it makes sense to further refine it with another level, as the number of choices becomes too broad to easily see and understand. So what do we call the levels of the taxonomy? You see some labels here. You can adopt any naming convention that makes sense in your business. What's essential is that whatever you adopt, everyone understands and uses the same one. For simplicity, we use the term category for the highest level, subcategory for any level below category, down to the last, which we call service family. Having a distinct label for the last level is helpful because everybody knows that's the last level of the taxonomy, so it's nice to be able to draw to a close with that. And we chose the term service family because that's usually what we find in terms of services attached to that. Here's an example of that hierarchy using Oracle. One of our categories in our taxonomy is called data center and ops. You see it up there at the upper left-hand side. Then we have subcategories we call platform and database, ending with a service family we call Oracle. Let's assume we have 6 or 7 different flavors of Oracle services, Windows, Linux, HP, UX, on and on. Oracle is a service family because Oracle alone is not a service. It's not consumable. Oracle for Windows is a service. It is consumable. In this example, we also have 3 different service offerings for Oracle for Windows, Silver, Gold, and Platinum. So 3 different levels there. Last, on the far left, you see requests, which are actions against the service, often some form of add, change, or remove. the line between where the taxonomy ends and the services begin can shrink or grow based on variety. For example, in the same case here, what if we only had one type of Oracle service, Oracle for Windows? We would not need a service family called Oracle. That would go away, and the service family, or the last level of the taxonomy, would be database. You can see how it could potentially move up and down. So now we're going to shift gears, and we're going to cover a number of best practice recommendations that we'd like to share with you guys around service taxonomies. The first is starting with a common understanding. And I know many of you have had idle training. I bet you found it much easier to discuss ITSM principles with coworkers who have also been through idle training. The same thing is true for moving from a technical, inwardly IT kind of focused organization to a services-based, customer-centric organization. It's important that we build a common understanding of key terms and principles, our lingua franca, as it were, for our team, so we're all communicating around the same points and we're having the same understanding of what these things mean. It's common to find every provider of services wanting their own portal and associated taxonomy, HR, IT, facilities, on and on. Creating a single broad taxonomy early on is critical. As mentioned, at the highest level, the framework should capture your broadest view. It's completely fine to create multiple different sub-taxonomies. It's expected. And sub-service catalogs inside a single broad taxonomy or a single broad service catalog. For example, the category HR would have a service catalog with services that are logically seen as HR services in the eyes of the customer. The same would be true for customer-facing IT services. A single taxonomy, along with a single service catalog with the subcatalog, like we said, gives us the ability to apply effective governance, giving providers some necessary latitude to serve their customers in a way they see fit, while also being able to present a consistent, high-quality, enterprise-wide portfolio of services to our customers. Remember our Amazon and Airbnb examples, the customers won't accept anything less. Building a taxonomy is always a group exercise. Using a visual taxonomy tool is highly recommended. We use a visual mapping technology called XMind. It's powerful, easy to use, great in a group, and it's inexpensive. A visual approach allows you to work effectively as a group and to quickly discuss, relabel, and rearrange so you evolve it and you then better understand the range after you come through this and the types of services offered, even as the services reach into the hundreds. It helps you see where a new service type might in one area be also valuable in another area. It makes it easier to prevent duplication of services you already have, driving up your reuse of existing services like we talked about, and enabling you to see where combining existing services can more easily create a new service, rather than designing each new service individually from start to finish. Note that we show services in orange and requests in green hanging off the purple taxonomy. And you could say, well, why are they even in the picture? Because they're not part of the framework, they're not part of the taxonomy, so why do we do this? While they are not part of the taxonomy, as we've gone through this and many, many times, seeing the services and requests has shown that it gives needed relevance to the taxonomy, so it helps us to make better decisions as to its depth, breadth, and its labeling. Okay, so this is a question we get asked a lot. How many services? Should we build lots of simple services or a few big but complex services? Because you could make everything a couple of services if you thought about it. Too many services may be confusing for the customer, and too big of a service can be a real load on IT to manage and measure. George Miller was a researcher during World War II. He was a PhD from Harvard, and in 1956 he published a theorem called Miller's number. It states that we humans can only handle 5 things error-free. By the number 9, error-free operation is very unlikely. So the sweet spot for acceptable error rate is 7 plus or minus 2. With that in mind, we know what our customer can handle. Now, we also have what we call Evergreen's numbers. And our numbers deal with the flow from service taxonomy to service and the number of choices at each step. Our experience has led us to believe and be pretty comfortable with the fact that the number of the number of the levels from the taxonomy to the service ought to be around 4 plus or minus 2. With the number of choices, Miller's number has proven good with 7 plus or minus 2. But if you look down here on the lower right-hand side, from our experience, that last category can move even towards the higher side, more to like a 9 plus or minus 2, as you've reached a specific area where the customer expects to find their answer. So the relevance in that area and the attention they focus on it is a bit higher. That's not science, but it just seems to be our experience. It's important to apply a building block mentality to constructing services, and not many do it today. Then you combine the blocks to create new services and variations of existing ones. If all of your services are single-threaded, custom-built, they'll be very expensive to create, impossible to maintain, and confusing to your customer. Think again about Amazon. What would it be like if every Amazon department had its own checkout procedure? But this idea has challenges too. Any service module, let's say for example, financial approval process, could be used in hundreds of services. In fact, it should be. So service configuration management is mandatory. We have to do it, with each service being managed as a configuration item and mapped into any combined services of which it is a part. I know the CMDB has a reputation as a solution in search of a problem. This is a really great use for it. It is important to kind of look past that reputation and use it for managing your services, or you will absolutely get lost. When you're the provider, it is hard to think like the customer. It's human nature. So as you create a taxonomy, a service portal, or anything that is about serving a customer, remember to define it in their language. Actively engage them, get their feedback to ensure your success. As the provider, when you're designing a service, if you're ever struggling to figure out what your customer might want, here's an easy trick. Snap your frame of mind. Go be the customer on your favorite customer experience for a few minutes, and you'll probably get your answer. After working with a large global construction firm to help them build their taxonomy, the CIO approached me and asked if we would help them reorganize IT consistent with the taxonomy. And this has actually happened a number of different times in meetings with customers. I said no. I said that's the opposite of what you want to do. If you create that alignment, then the IT silo walls of ownership will start to rise up, just recreating your old problems of silos. So how do we avoid this? Remember this principle. The owners of any section of the taxonomy, like HR, are not the providers. The owners are the customers of that section. And that is clarifying, and it helps release that mentality that belongs to me as a certain provider. Okay, so here's a couple of pitfalls that are worth avoiding. There's an old saying, we met the enemy and it is us. It is true that the big pitfalls are frequently the ones we create ourselves out of our inherent IT nature. We often don't even see them. IT navel gazing is looking IT out rather than customer in. You cannot design services customers want and need if you don't talk to them. Start and sustain a dialogue with your key customers as you go down the services path. Make it a part of the process you follow for success, and you will find you'll be a lot more efficient and you'll get things done right the first time. Second point, don't go all Wild West on it. In IT, if some is good, more is better. When we have a new exciting idea, we go gangbusters, and we can build a lot of stuff fast. So we can build hundreds of rifle shot services quickly with no consistency, discipline, or reuse. Then we have a confused mess. Slow down, be premeditated, and build with enterprise durability and longevity in mind. Last, don't claim victory too early. Taxonomy is challenging because in some ways it is a new way of thinking with some new terminology. Even so, in this customer-centric journey, it's one of the easy parts. Building the service offerings and delivering the services well in a way customers love them, that's where it gets really challenging. All right, so that's all I've got to present today. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he's going to demonstrate some of these concepts in Service Portal.
Wonderful, thanks, Don. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. So as kind of Don indicated, I'm going to start where I oftentimes start. So I'm going to start in the kind of Service Portal area. This is basically a self-service portal that we've built on top of that Service Portal framework, which was introduced as part of the Helsinki release of ServiceNow. And this is, this is where we can go to consume, information about the services. We can submit those service requests that Don talked about, and obviously we can track the status of those requests. I also want to highlight too, this is also an area where through the self-service portal we can push alerts, announcements, we can drive prescriptive content to our consumers. And the way in which we style, this is what we call our Now theme, which is one of 6 of our themes that we have in our application. But any of these can be easily branded and styled to fit your company, your culture, and the image you're trying to portray. Let me go to the service catalog section. And this is where we go to see that published list of services, and this is where that service taxonomy or service listing is going to come into play. Again, some of the purpose for displaying these through the portal is to provide that transparency to the customer, clarify on expectations, and hopefully align these in a language that matches, kind of the customer-centric language so we can better communicate with our customers. You'll see a couple options on here at the top where I can toggle this to My Services, for example. And so My Services really represents where I'm an active subscriber, usually through an inheritance, so based off of my department, my location, my company, or some other affiliation is going to drive kind of my subscribed services. Also, there is a way in which you can provide ratings and feedback and kind of provide those star ratings related to services. We can also see those from a highest rating area. There is an area also where we can show services that I specifically own, but in this case I will go back to the service taxonomy. Another thing I want to highlight too, and Don alluded to this in the organization of our services, we can break these out by high-level catalogs. So you'll see here I've got just 2 as an example, information services versus human resources. So we've only got a few classifications and categories specific to human resources, but you can see we can break these out from one high-level grouping to the next. I'll move it back to all. Further, we can jump into any one of these classifications and see what are the specific services that are offered in here. All right, so these are my HR or business applications, HR, as well as my business applications, finance, and the different services that belong there. And maybe I'm curious to see what's in our kind of endpoint computing area. I can see this is where our desktop support, laptop support services are organized and maintained. Another thing I want to highlight too quickly is Don mentioned using the tools like XMIME or the mind mapping software to create these groupings and classifications. We do have a way in which we can take that data from a tool like XMIME, right, which is to spit it out in usually a CSV file that looks like this, right, that I can then take the content of this, make sure I get all my rows in here. So I can take this content, if I wanted to import it in and load it as categories and service groupings, I can do that through this tool, which analyzes what are my different structures that I've got defined, what are my categories I'm going to insert, what are my services I'm going to insert, and I can make some alterations, adjustments through this as a way to take that visual mind map and get it into ServiceNow as a structural setup. I will mention that, and Don alluded to this as well, when it comes to the definition of the service and the service details, we tend to do those directly in ServiceNow, and specifically when it comes to altering an existing published service, that tends to be something where you'd use change management to document and communicate what those material changes are to those deployed services, and then make those updates as part of that change management process. Let me come back to here. Let's go look at a service so you can see some of the details. I'm just going to search for our expense management service. And so this is what we call our kind of service tombstone, or you could also call it a service brochure. So this is where we're communicating what is the service, who it's available to, different requirements, what's in scope, what's out of scope. We can have, as Don mentioned, multiple different offerings. In this case, we have one offering with 3 different commitments about that offering. We also can communicate health and status information. In this case, I can see there's an upcoming planned maintenance activity. I can see our health over the last 5 days is all green. I could also look at some of the history if I wanted to. Feedback, here's where that ratings come from, right? So consumer-based feedback, typically as part of a fulfillment activity or as a consumer using this service, they can communicate that various feedback. Also helpful from a customer perspective, you'll see frequently asked questions out here. So if I'm a new subscriber, new consumer of this expense management service, this might be where I want to start to answer some of the common questions that I might have in interacting with this particular service. And then lastly, you'll see there's an option where I can request make different transactional requests in context to this service. So I could request access to the software. I can request an enhancement. I can request a role change. And obviously the list could go deeper than this into other areas as well. But in this case, there's 3 different things I can request and order relevant to this particular service. If I click one on this, will show me that item that I could add to my cart or submit now. Notice I could also go back and look more about the service from this referenceable link here as well. So let me go back to you. So I showed service health from a perspective of an individual service. This is more of a macro view. So I have an overall service health dashboard. You'll see I have a couple outstanding outages out there for a couple of the services. I could also elect as part of this to be notified about these outages, which will communicate updates that are happening pertinent to this outage, as well as whether when restoration takes place, I'll get a notification relevant to that. Then I can also see my taxonomy down here, my services from an overarching service health perspective. Notice again, I can group these if I want to look at just HR, if I want to look at IS, I can filter those in that context. I can also, if I wanted to hone in on specific ones that contain certain words, I can see just those that are SAP related. And further, I can also break and expand my classification levels. In this case, if I want to break this out into multiple levels, I can see that as well, just to better present maybe in how I want to consume this. All right, so let's move away from the customer for a second, and let's actually create a new service so I can show you kind of how that data gets into ServiceNow to kind of present through the portal. So let me go create a new business service. And I'm going to call this, make sure I get my name right on here. I'm going to call this Technology Training Services. I'm going to set myself as the owner. Just give it a version number, 1.0. My support group is our learning management service or learning management system support group. I'm going to also say leave myself as the manager of this. Classification, this is where we go and browse that taxonomy. In this case, I want to put it under our professional services and training services. And then our kind of way we're going to cost or price this is going to be a per class kind of cost model. And then just to fill out some more details, I'm going to copy and paste some descriptive information into here. I'm going to copy and paste some of this at-a-glance information, which is HTML. So I will paste that in as straight HTML, which gives me that formatting. Notice also I could define additional features, benefits, contact information, and other details about this service. But I'm going to kind of leave it at that at this point. So I got kind of the framework of my service. The other thing I want to do, you'll see a related items area. And Don mentioned this, kind of the relating different services together. So one of the things I want to denote with our service is that it has a dependency on another service out there. So in this case, I'm going to define a depends on relationship. I'm going to look for my specific service, which is our lab provisioning service. So we're basically using our lab provisioning service as a mechanism to provision labs that we use for delivering our technology training. So I'm going to define a relationship between the two. And by doing so, I look down here, now I've got a whole bunch of relationships associated to my service because lab provisioning was also dependent on other things as well. And so when I view this from a map perspective, you'll kind of see the full tree. I'm going to move it horizontally. So you'll see here's our service dependent on another service, which is dependent on an application, which is also dependent on another service that's made up of some applications that run on a server. and also are linked to another service out there. And the notable here is that obviously if there were any defect or if there were any degradation of service related to one of these components, it would have an overarching trickle effect to those business services that depend on this, which I'll hit on in a moment here. There are a couple of things I want to do with my business service definition record before I kind of put it into play here. One is, so I'm going to give it a picture here in a second, but also another thing I want to do is mention we can link these services to things you can request. And there are a couple ways I can do that. I can link this either to defining specific items that I can request in context to this, or I can also kind of do it more dynamically, which in this case I can link it to what's called a filter in ServiceNow, which is a query, which in this case I want to link it to kind of catalog items that are in a specific category that I can request. So these are my training catalog items that I can request. I want to link those two together. I can do the same thing for my knowledge articles, where I can say these are my specific knowledge articles I want to show as my frequently asked questions, which in this case are ones that contain the keyword of training, and then I'm excluding a specific record in that list as well. And I'm going to give this is just the button label that shows up next to my service, which I'm going to label as submit a training request. And then lastly, let me put a picture on this just to kind of beautify it a little more. I will give it an icon for my technology training service. I think my definition is complete. So the next thing I want to do, I want to show you where these dependency views can come into play. And in one case is on the service health area. So if I were to, say, create a new incident for one of these components. Actually, before I go there, let me go back for a second here. I wanted to show you one of the things. So if I were to create an outage for one of my components, there are some rules that are applied to kind of evaluate how it impacts my technology training service. And those are defined in this outage dependency definition record. And what this looks like is it basically shows, widen this here, basically shows whether or not we activate any outage spreading, which is to say that if I were to have an outage for, say, one of these applications over here, whether or not it has any impact on my technology training service. So I can turn that off if I want to, or I can activate it. I can also have rules here as to whether or not things like incidents or high priority incidents should be represented as service degradations for my service. And then lastly, I can get in a little more granularity here. I can do things like, if I wanted to, I can take these two applications and I can kind of cluster them together and call them, say, an application cluster. And what that's going to do is it's going to basically mean that both of them have to be in a degraded or outage kind of state in order for them to have any impact on my particular business service. I also could, if I wanted to, exclude specific components. Right, so maybe Active Directory has no impact on the health of my service, so I could exclude that from its dependency tree. So that just defines the rules. And I'll save that. And now let's see those rules kind of in action. So I'm going to create a new incident. I'll put myself as the caller. And I'm going to choose this server, which if you go back on my map, that's this server way down here on the tree. I'm going to say that this server is unresponsive. And then I'm going to create an outage for it, basically saying it's not working at its present time. I'll just put some details on here. I'll just say more details to come shortly, and then I'll begin this particular outage. All right, so now I've got an outage record. So I look at my outages tab. This is the record I created right here for this one record, but you'll see it also created outage records for the 3 services that are impacted by that. And you'll notice they all have the same short description, they all have the same begin time, and the reason is they're all linked together. They're all really treated as one outage, but are the propagation of this outage to the other services that it impacts. So just to kind of prove that, I'm going to actually move the date on here. I'll change this to say it started at 8 a.m. this morning. Save that. If I refresh this, you'll notice all of them are now 8 a.m. today as well. They're all linked and synchronized together. Now from a consumer perspective, right, I'll come back to this page, but you'll see obviously immediately from here, that they're starting to show up. So on my home page, right, there's now new outages that have been reported out here for our different services that are down. If I go to that health dashboard page, I see those same outages. Right, if I were already a subscriber to some of these services, they would show me as in the notify on switched area. But I can see more details related to these individual outages and activities. Right. Further, if I come back to this particular outage record, and we say we've already restored service, I do an end outage now, and I go back. They all should be with an end date now, and also if I come out here, you'll see that they remove from the list once the service has been restored, and any of those things I was subscribed to for notifications would send a notification out to me. All right, so let's also, now that we're in this portal, let's take a look at our new service that we created. Let me just refresh my list to make sure it's new out here. So if I go down to my professional services, training services area, I now see our technology training services service item out here. And here's that tombstone for it. We didn't define any offerings, we didn't define any in-scope information, so I don't have tabs for that, but I do see the descriptive information I put out here. I also see those frequently asked questions that were dynamically listed or linked to this item, which include things like, what is our upcoming training schedule? So as a consumer, I can go see what's this training schedule, what classes can I take and register for in the near term. Also, we linked it to the items I could request, and you see that button label is submit a training request that matches what we put in there. When I click this, it will show the items that are available for requesting either individual classes that I could request, or in this case, this is where that lab provisioning dependency came into play, requesting a specific training environment. And this one I want to show you a little more detail on, so I'm going to request a training environment so you can see kind of how this guy flows as an element of my service. So in this case, it's going to show me some different classes I can get a lab environment for. Maybe I want to learn more about Drupal CMS, so I'm going to request an environment for that, give it a name. I'll just call it test student environment, and I'll put my date on here just to kind of make it stand out differently. Describe my requirements of what I need. All right, I could choose to start the environment right now. By default, it's giving me a couple weeks of this environment being available for me to use. I could widen that or add more time to this if I wanted to. I'll kind of choose the 10th. I'll go ahead and submit my request. Now this one throws me into a page where I can kind of track the progress of my request, and I can see there's multiple kind of stages of this. One is it's awaiting approval initially, and then it's going to provision an environment for me, do some verification, remediation if there is issues, and then ultimately would be completed. The first thing I see is it's waiting for approval from our learning management system, our support group. Remember, that was the group that we defined as our primary support group for our service, which is kind of how this is tied together. And just to move it along, I'll actually come over here and look at, this is one of the members of that approval group. You'll see on this home page they have an item awaiting their approval. That's that request that we just submitted. They could reject it or they could approve it. In this case, I'm going to approve it just to move it along. And so it's approved. I now see it's in a provisioning environment state. This may take a moment or two, and kind of while it's working, I'll kind of just show you some of the details of this request, so you can, or this workflow, so you can kind of see what's happening behind the curtain. So basically, the workflow from an administrative perspective looks like this, where it routed for approval. Right, we already completed that step. It's currently in a provisioning environment kind of step. Once that's fully complete, and this is reaching into our an environment or a SkyTap environment to actually provision a new training instance for me. Once that's complete, it'll then move to notifying me that my environment's ready and kind of prompt me to verify that everything's working as I would expect. And it looks like it's there. I come over here. This kind of timeline has been updated. My environment's been provisioned. I can see right here in my notes, launch environment here. I can click here. Kind of punches me out to our SkyTap environment. Here's my specific training instance that I can start, access, and start learning Drupal and start utilizing this training service and this component of the training service out here. All right, so everything might look fine. Maybe there was something that didn't work right entirely, so I can come up here and say, no, it's not really meeting my satisfaction. I'll just say needs login information to machine. So I'll communicate that back. And where that goes is if I come down here, this is my request. Right, so it's in a verification stage. And it just basically created a new task for our learning management system support group with the comments that were passed in, right? So I can see that the person needed login information for the machine. As part of this task, I would provide the login information and then close this out, which then reprompts the customer to validate satisfaction, which maybe in this case I say, yep, everything's working like I expect. And I can see my overall workflow is now in a completed status. Right? So the last thing that happened here too, or just one other auxiliary thing that happened here is that I did create a new training environment for myself, which I can also access from this portal. I can see here's my new student environment. It's currently in a stop status, but this is where I can also come back to and launch that environment to start using it and make use of or executing my training activity. So that covers what I wanted to show you today. Basically, I hope this was helpful in kind of seeing both how the organization of services can be represented here in the Service Portal, but also how kind of to build the different pieces into it, both the classifications, the service definition, and then linking it to things that are actually orchestrated or executed through the platform.
Thanks, Jeff. What's interesting, two things, Jeff. You get the adjective of the webinar award with the word beautify.
For creating words.
Beautifying.
Beautification.
That was beautification. Yeah. That was a lovely one. The other thing to point out in the SkyTab demo, that shows a principle that is really an Amazon-like principle or an Uber-like principle or Zappos, any one of these modern service environment principles, which is the combination of beautiful, complete, and elegant self-service with workflow and automation on the backside. And not only is it dramatically eliminating the amount of work someone has to do, the customer is driving decision process from the front end with self-service, and then there's a feedback loop, the notification, right, where it is basically updating the customer as well as to the status of this request, which is highly automated, right, to eliminate the need to respond to the customer when they're inquiring about the status of the request. So it's really thinking this whole circle from end to end, this complete, wonderful experience, right, in a turnkey process. That's what we're trying to show. And this, when customers say, what percentage of our work can be automated, my answer is, how about 100%? And everybody laughs, of course, but that's what Amazon does. So will we get 100%? I don't know, but they did, and that's what Uber does. No one from Uber touches it when you interact in the system, right? So this is the modern paradigm of work, is this combination. All right, so let's go to the possible next step slide. Thank you, Jeff. So this is actually our Metro look and feel, and Jeff was showing what is more of an Apple look and feel, which you see in Service Portal. And these are personal preferences because we have about six different schemas out of the box in the product. So I personally like Metro better still, but I'm biased. So anyhow, if you're interested in that, you can demo our self-service catalog portal yourself. You can either do it from our website, you follow the banner on the homepage, or you can download it to your demo instance or to your dev or test instance from the ServiceNow store. Yeah, it actually is the most highly viewed and highest purchased product on the store. That's kind of cool. So if you're looking for a better way to organize services, there is a video, a little more detail on our website of how this Service Taxonomy MIME application works and what we do with it there. That might be a benefit to you. And can you hit the next slide, Jeff?
Yep.
The last thing I will promote as a possible next step. Lots of organizations are looking right now at Helsinki and thinking, hey, we might be moving from something to Helsinki. And in that, you have the question of, do you want to be using the CMS still, or do you want to move to Service Portal? And if you're going to move to Service Portal, which is a lot of great functionality, then the question should be, what do we want to do? Do we just want like for like, or do we want to improve the experience that our customers are having? Do we want to do a better job because we've got a better set of technologies we can work with? And if that's a possibility, one thing you might be interested in is our 2-week strategy and roadmap engagement around Service Catalog and Service Portal and self-service, all these functional areas, and the things that underpin it. Right? So it's not only is it a strategy and a multiple phase roadmap to going towards a customer-centric ITSM experience, it also dives into the service roles and responsibilities and that service owner, and we deliver you a RACI of the service owner's responsibilities and roles, which makes it easier to explain to people what it is you might be asking them to do. We also take a couple of passes through service taxonomy, so you have kind of a working V2 taxonomy, and we leave the platform with you, the XMAX platform, to give you what you need to run it, right? So you can continue to extend it, and that is normally $7,500 on its own, but you get that as part of the offer. Then you have the service design process, which basically you work through a number of services with you, teach you how to build them, how to leverage the design process, how to make sure you build complete and consistent services, and you get to keep that and use it. And then, last but not least, we have an executive briefing and roadmap, and we give you a future state working service catalog and portal of so that you can take that visual and present it to executives, present it to your peers, show it to people inside the organization of what the future of IT could look like in your organization if you went down a path like this from a customer-centric ITSM standpoint. So that's enough talking for me. All that is done for $17,500, and we unconditionally guarantee it. If you're not happy, don't pay for it. So that's it for us. Do we have any questions out there, Log, Steph?
We do, and before I get to the questions, I just wanted to note when you all receive the slides, you'll get a link to download the slides. There will be links embedded in these last 2 slides that will bring you directly to those offers, so directly to the pages where you can view that service taxonomy video and read more about the two-day offer and I'm sorry, it's a 2-week offer.
2 weeks.
Wow, it would be really quick if we did it 2 days. To the 2-week offer and to the demo. But again, you can also go to our homepage and you'll see some banners across the top. So, on to questions. Jeff, this one's for you. Is there a limit to the number of levels you can build the service taxonomy?
So, Don kind of covered this with his Miller's Law slide in terms of kind of best practice there. I'll kind of answer from a technology perspective, no. I mean, you certainly could have an innumerable number of levels that you could have out there, but ultimately it should, obviously you want to consider the user experience, you want to consider how much information a user can actually consume and how many drill down clicks do they have to do to get to the service that they want. Right, and so obviously that's where we apply those kind of Miller's Law and how many pieces of data can you consume and how many levels deep should it really be usable to get down. So for a lot of our customers, we see kind of like we saw in the demo today where there's 2 or 3 levels deep from the classification to get down to a service. They might have some branches that might go 4 or 6 levels deep, but those are kind of more on the higher end.
Okay, great. Also, do we need a CMDB in order to provide service health?
So no, not necessarily. I mean, so some of obviously I spent a good deal of time in the demo kind of showing that relationship tree of CIs to a service and created an outage for one of the components that then cascaded and created a service impact to our parent service. So some of those relations, the kind of granular level of starting at a server network device level and showing service impact is going to be difficult to do if you don't have a CMDB and a relationships between those components. But we do have customers that still, will create outage records directly against a service so they can represent that and communicate that information to their customers. And you could do that without having, say, a fully related CMDB. But ultimately, to do it from, say, an event management tool up through to the impacted service, to do it well, you'll have to have those relationships and that kind of mapping built.
Okay, great. And Don, I'm going to give this one to you. For how many customers has Evergreen implemented Service Portal?
So today, we have about 24 customers on our Service Portal application. over the last probably 18 months. And these are the ones that have purchased it on the software store and are using it. And the other thing we've done is on top of, we got very early access to Service Portal itself, and we are actually in the process of recertifying our application on Service Portal. It's already been submitted, so we should know, I would think, within the next week or two. So we have worked very, very deeply in it because of that, and because we have to certify what we build and sell as scoped applications in the store to the same criteria that ServiceNow does for their very own products, right? So it's a pretty deep basis from that standpoint.
Great, thanks. Jeff, another one for you. In the demo, a lab environment was provisioned for the user. Is that out of the box or something Evergreen configured?
So, I mean, in this particular case, it's something that we at Evergreen configured, and it was done using kind of REST web services into, as I mentioned, I think in the demo, SkyTap was the actual engine for the environment. But I do want to mention there are out-of-the-box orchestration-based integrations that go against Amazon EC2 and go to Azure that do very similar to what I did today in terms of spinning up a computing environment. And so, basically if the engine has some sort of web services-based API, we could obviously integrate to it with ServiceNow's workflow and kind of do, as Don indicated, the fully automated workflow where the user doesn't have to do, or there aren't actually routed tasks or human-based fulfillment activities as part of that execution.
Yeah, it actually kind of points out something really important too, and that because of RESTful API and because of the massive number of cloud-based solutions that are out there, and that's only going to grow exponentially. You see this whole thing coming together as a solution. On one front, you have consumption and customer experience. In the middle, you have request and approval and governance, which is the routing of the workflow process. And on the back side, you have automation, and you may have manual steps too, but you have fulfillment, right? And so there's a ton of fulfillment things being done via API, being done for RESTful, and that's going to get easier and easier. But the parts of this that have not been well managed and are really challenged is the customer demand management at the front end, creating an experience that customers love, and then governance in the middle for request and approval for that process. They're not technically terrific challenges, but they're areas where basically all three of those things are required to create a customer-centric end-to-end solution.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone. I don't see any additional questions, so just a reminder, keep an eye out for an email. It'll come from the ReadyTalk platform, the same email address that you received your login information, and the slides will include links to the offers and the demos. And we look forward to having you on the future event. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.